And I am so excited that Helene has agreed to chat to me today. She is incredibly busy, and you may have noticed her on Dragon's Den 2 weeks ago. So yeah, let's crack on. I'm going to start, Helene, by introducing you to us a little bit, because I'm not sure how much you'll know about us. We're not a huge society, but so this event is run by the St John's Women's Network at Oxford. Women have been at Oxford for over 100 years now, but colleges like St John's were all male until the late 1970s and only celebrated 40 years of women last year. So we're very much in the alumni when you look at the alumni, in the minority when you look at the alumni of the college. So the Women's Network aims to provide opportunities for us to connect with people who've had similar experiences, get advice and mentoring, and run events like this and have conversations that an all-male college wouldn't have. So that's what we're here for. And I really wanted to talk to you today because I came across your app about a year ago, and everything your app says just makes sense, but I'd never heard it before. So I think this kind of conversation is really important and making topics like menstruation more mainstream. So I was wondering if you could start with a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got into AI.
Yeah, thank you so much, Issy. And it's incredible to see that some colleges or communities in London are still, or in the UK, are still very much male. I know as a small experience, I was like with my ex-husband in London, like near St. James Street, and in a club, and we were having dinner. And I was like, oh, it's actually, and as we went out of dinner with his father, we passed in front of these massive, beautiful windows on St. James Street. And he's like, oh, that's actually the main area. And I was like, oh, so where did we have dinner? And he said, well, we had dinner in the basement where women are allowed. And I was like, oh, okay, interesting. And that's like, yeah, clubs in the UK, in the world, and yeah, as you said, like colleges, etc. So I think it's like still incredible that there would be like discriminations and segregations like that. But that's just like a reflection of what is happening very much still today, very much everywhere, and still also like why I started this company. Personally, as my background, I studied mathematics and financial risk. I started my career as a quant in a hedge fund, so in data science, and then I was a management consultant for large corporates in artificial intelligence, so very much on the data science side. And on the side of that, I was always doing sports. So I was swimming competitively when I was a kid, and then I was a semi-pro rugby player, and then got into endurance sports very much as an amateur, doing triathlons and 100 kilometers ultra marathons, ice swimming, and surfing, skiing. Anyway, very much like anything I can touch that is outdoors and outside and sports. And realized that in sports we have huge amount of data sets, but we understand very little about our bodies. And coming from a data science background, for like it's quite extraordinary that we know so much about finance or cars, whatever it is, but so little about our bodies. So started WILD.AI, and as got into that, realized that we knew very little about our bodies, but even less when it came to women, because then realized that 80% of the medical research is still done on male mice. And yeah, basically no one really cares, and no one really fully was that interesting to analyze specifically the female body. And as I grew up, also like coming from a very big insecurity, like I was doing sports, and I always thought it was basically less cool to be a woman or a girl, and then a woman than a boy. So I thought it was like their bodies were like so efficient and praised in sports. And when I was a semi-pro rugby player, like people would say things like, "Oh, girl is so cute." I mean, I was a very serious athlete, but they were saying it was cute. And so I always thought it was like really like an insult, everything that was women related, like cute or pretty, and not terms or adjectives that were used for men, like strong and impressive and kick-ass. And I was like, well, it's not that cool to be a girl. And yeah, like, and then I evolved in worlds very much male-oriented, like hedge funds and finance. And again, like women, like very discriminated. Like when I was in hedge funds, I remember that conference where there were no women whatsoever, and everyone thought I was a PA, whereas I was a quant. And yeah, that's just very much a reflection of the world. And And so started the company, and now basically the company is so extensive research on what is a woman, because a woman is a huge amount of things, and there's two big branches in the world. It's like in our company. One is really like making sure that we change the messaging on what is women. We're not these fragile, boring, complex, moody and bitchy bodies. We're these incredible bodies. Like we can actually create humans, and we're the only ones who can do that. Even the most advanced tech companies in the US cannot do it yet, and this must be praised. And we have this incredible body, and if half of the population has it, it's probably a feature rather than a bug. So one is like this big empowerment messaging, and the second one is like extensive research on the female body, what is a woman, and translate research into our app, helping women eat and train
Very cool. Thank you. That was it in a nutshell. So you kind of touched on this, but when did you first realize that there was actually a need for a specific app like WILD.AI? Like obviously to us, it makes so much sense, but looking back, was there one thing that suddenly highlighted it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Actually, it's so funny because like the company was started for both men and women, and again, like because most of my like I guess at that time my peers were men. I wanted to be recognized by my peers who were the men, and so when I realized that there was this like huge issue, because like basically the very first thing was that I realized that in our data sets, the data was changing based on menstrual cycle. And at that time I had no idea what was ovulation. I literally did not know all of that. It sounds to me crazy now today that I didn't know that, but I didn't know that there was a window where you were fertile, and that it was like I actually had no idea basically. But we saw in the data that your resting heart rate and heart rate variability was changing like every day basically. And so started becoming interested in that, and then I tested the idea basically, and realized that I pitched it once to an investor, and she was like, "I never heard that." And I was like, "Well, interesting. Like I never heard it either." And then at that time I started to become more interested, and that's really where we untapped it, and then we went full in, and that was probably 2-3 years ago now.
Very cool. Let's chat a little bit more about your data sets, because I'm quite curious about this. So what are your recommendations based on? If like 80% of studies are done on male mice, so there are enough studies in women about sport to run an app on, or does it evolve as you get more data from your users? How does it work?
Yeah, both actually. So it's really interesting. So first of all, like what is a woman? So a woman will like have this ever-changing body. Like at 13, 10, 12, 13, whenever you had your periods the first time, like we go through this massive body change, which, you know, when you are asked, like as the other kids, like remember, like the second time you have your periods, you go to school, and you have to like you're told to run around the block like the other kids, but you're bleeding and it hurts, but what you're hearing is like moody and bitchy and just deal with it basically. So as girls and then women, the only thing we hear very much is like ignore the signals, and it doesn't exist. And then we take like a pill, another pill to fight acne. By the way, these are like massive, like if we understand, then you understand how much hormones impact our bodies. It's like a girl at 13 who takes a pill for like the next 20-30 years is crazy. But that's what we do. And then I try to get pregnant, abortions, miscarriages, and then 10 years of perimenopause between 42 and 52, and then menopause, postmenopause. So our body is changing all the time. And for 40 years, we have a menstrual cycle, which encompasses so like the periods, which is the first part, and then in the middle ovulation, and towards the end premenstrual symptoms. And again, here very much the messaging that we get is like, oh, periods so annoying, premenstrual symptoms horrible. The reality is that if you look at it from an athlete's perspective, an athlete is not someone who is like overperform it all the time. We have times where you have to rest and recover, and time where you peak. And if you look at the female body as this incredible machine that is like every single month has a time where it goes towards over peaking, which is the day 3 of the periods up to ovulation, and then the time to like rest and recover, and you respect that, is really interesting. Because when you are having premenstrual symptoms, yeah, maybe it hurts, but then you actually rebirth. You have this rebirth, And at that time when you have symptoms, it's a time where you're really creative, you're very in tune with your emotions. And like, since when having emotions is a bad thing? Again, like it's been like they're like saying like, oh, women are moody and bitchy. Well, yeah, we have emotions, it's beautiful. And if you understand that in a beautiful way, even like at a professional level, it's like, I am a very different CEO than if I was not listening to these things, because I can be at that time, it's probably things where I can be focusing more on like being more closer to my employees and to their needs, etc. And that's not a bad thing, because I eventually like I want them to perform and to be good. So if I'm listening to them and I'm like in tune with them, I'm not their therapist, but I'm a human. And it's a really good thing. And so first of all, like there is little research, but there is research. So what we've done, the first chunk of work was understanding what is existing, what is there, and can we understand it? So we've done that. In my team we have researchers, but like also like the world leading researcher in the field called Dr. Stacey Sims. So she's really like the world reference. She wrote a book called Roar and recognized by everyone, including Nike. Like last month, she worked with them as the world reference in the sector. So she's in my team and she's done all her research on that. So what is a woman? How can we translate the needs of the body on a daily basis? And so that's the first part of work. And then the second part, to what you said, we have assumptions and can we verify them? So we put assumptions in the app, and then we see how the body reacts. And we have data both from wearables, so like that's a wearable, that ring is a wearable, and from wearables, so understanding your metrics, how they're changing, but also manual input. So the women in the app, if they have a wearable, we have the data from there. If they do activities, etc., so we have the data. Objective data plus subjective data, that is manual input, and we see how you evolve, and you see in the app how you evolve as well, depending on that. So yeah, and our aim is also to work with universities and researchers to be able to continue advancing research.
Yeah. Oh, cool. So it does both at once. So at what kind of sporting level does this kind of monitoring and working around the menstrual cycle start to make a difference?
At what level? Sports level?
Yeah.
Any actually, like it's right now where it's positioned is for women who are active. So if you're not doing any sports, you probably have less interest in it, because it's like how to eat and how to train and how to recover. And if you're not active, you have less like reasons to come to the app on a daily basis. But we have a lot of women who are also like not really exercising, who actually do want to have it. But we have like from professionals, so like the best professionals, Olympians and pros, down to amateurs. So if you are like training for, there's no events anymore, but half marathons, university level, like we have a lot of athletes as well, a lot of women using it. So yeah, all levels really.
Cool. So I wanted to chat to you a little bit about funding as well. So that's where I'll go next. So and Dragon's Den, if that's okay. So could you tell us a little bit about what it's like getting funding as a woman? Because I've heard some podcasts where you've talked about this specifically, because you go to male boards full of male like CEOs. Yeah, what's that like?
Well, it depends. Like I think like also like the reaction changed with time. So probably like 3 years ago, when I was pitching, like people were saying like, oh, it's a niche market, and I was like women in sports, like open your eyes, like go in the street, like it's not a niche market. And also like, oh, reactions like, oh yeah, interesting, but I'm a man, so not for me. And I'm like, you would invest in cancer research, whereas you don't have cancer, and female health you won't, whereas you probably come from functioning healthy female reproductive system. But interestingly, like a lot of men actually like feel very disconnected from the topic, and they would never use words like periods or vaginal discharges or things like that. Like they feel very uncomfortable using these words. So I'm like, have you ever bought a Tampax? And they're like, oh no. I'm like, well, we buy toilet paper. So it's like, but it's really interesting how taboo like all these things around like the menstrual cycle and the periods is for men, for a lot of women as well, by the way, but for men in particular. So that, and I think that kind of changed now, because like there is more interest, and there are more people like me and like a company that is speaking out, and there's been like all these things around the like, yeah, since like basically like educating people on the topic. But fundraising with men is like, I still find it quite funny, because like I like using the actual words and they feel quite uncomfortable, to be honest. And it's very funny. But I think it changed, and I think like I did raise money successfully, so it does eventually work. But I think like I had that advice from another female founder early on. First of all, I'm a solo female founder, so I'm like accumulating a lot of things that investors like less, because in their biases they still think that women are less intelligent. Like honestly, like it's an actual truth. But men who have daughters actually are interested as well. So it's actually quite interesting. A man who has a girlfriend or wife might not be interested, but a man who saw his little girl going through puberty actually is interested. It's really interesting, because I think like the father of this generation are different. Like I love my dad, but he definitely was another generation, and at his age, like they were not as close to the topics, whereas now I think the world has changed, so that works.
Yeah, that's really important. I mean, in terms of making it less taboo, like obviously you were on a major BBC program like Dragon's Den. So could you tell us a little bit what that's like? And also, I loved your power pose, like how you stood in Dragon's Den. Was that a conscious decision, or is that just how you stand?
It's so funny. So I have a picture. I think like if you go on my LinkedIn, it's a picture I have. It's like it was taken for Forbes, and I have like my legs spread. And I had a lot of comments. It's so funny. Like I was in Forbes, which is like in my world, like it's like amazing. And I have people who comment on the way my clothes. Like, well, congratulate me for being in Forbes rather than what I'm wearing. Like this is such a like on Twitter. There was like I did an incubator called Entrepreneur First. They interviewed me for an article like I don't know, a month ago, and they put it on Twitter. And there's one comment from a guy. There's just one comment, and there's one comment, and the guy says like, "Oh, you're dressed like Elizabeth Holmes." I'm like, yeah. By the way, there's like 700 and thousands of male founders who are wearing a T-shirt similar to Mark Zuckerberg, who was also, like in legal issues. But like you would comment on the way I dress rather than on the content. So like there's so many biases on that. And the Forbes picture where I have my leg spread, a lot of people would comment on that as well. They're like, oh, the way you pose like leg spread is a bit like not very feminine. I'm like, well, define feminine. And I feel strong when I stand like that. And doing sports as well is like, I do qigong, which is like kind of a martial art similar to Tai Chi, and basically like it's basically like your energy flowing in your body. And when you stand in a certain way, you actually do feel different. And like I don't know if you know the New Zealand rugby team. That before they play the game, they do this haka, and it's really, really aggressive. But the thing is, like, when you do things like that, you feel very empowered. And when you look at movies, the people going to war, like 1500, they're like screaming on their horses because it makes you feel powerful. And so actually these things really, really work. And before I go on stage, it's very weird. Like in the backstage, like everyone's like, whenever I pitch with other people, everyone's like, trembling, etc. And I'm doing like breathing exercises and opening up my body basically. So yeah, on Dragon's Den, first of all, it's like this is how I stand in general, but it's also very consciously because it's positive reinforcement, and I really believe in it as well. So yeah.
I thought it was great. I loved it. I wondered if it was rugby related.
Things like throughout like growing up actually, but it's
So will you be taking any leads from their ideas, like using WILD.AI to gather data and sell it, like social media sites, or are you going to stick with your current getting like paid for your services instead?
We don't sell data ever.
Yeah.
And the reason is like we are a new generation of apps. So the generation before us, they were making revenues for selling data sets.
Yeah.
Now, first of all, it's illegal. With global data privacy regulation, GDPR, which is great because we were born with it. So and also like women today are much more aware of this topic of like data privacy issues. Having said that, we do ask for your permission to use the data for advancing research. So, but the interesting thing is like, because women, when they start to discover what we're doing, they love it, and they really feel like there needs to be more research. So they really willingly participate in that, which is incredible. It's like such a, I mean, I'm so happy, and I wouldn't say lucky, but because I think we worked towards that luck, but I'm so happy we discovered that place that is such a huge opportunity, because yeah, I really feel like every day that we're solving something that women really want.
Yeah, it's very good. You're very different to like a social media app or something like that. Yeah. So I did want to chat to you a little bit about diversity, because obviously we're a women's network in a mostly male college in alumni terms. So what does your industry, like finance and AI, kind of look like in terms of diversity, and what's it like to be in your shoes in this industry?
Very bad. But it's also like why I do things like this, like right now, is because I think that I mean, I had questions from investors saying like, oh, when do you plan to have a child? I'm like, this is none of your business. If you want, next time I have sex, I can text you, but because I was married. But you know, it's like, this is literally none of your business. And I can do it, by the way. Like, women can do it, and it's a very like higher income question. Like, women in the lowest income, they've been working and having kids forever. So that's not an issue. But it's really bad. And from the top to the bottom, from top, like meaning like investors, not that they hire, but like they have the decision making. So like, back to your question, do investors react well or not? The issue is like, you would invest in things that you think relevant and interesting. And at the top end, I think I'm not 100% sure of the number. I think there's 2% investors who are women in VCs. Is really small. It's tiny. And no, maybe it's wrong. I don't know. I don't remember. Don't take my word for it. But anyways, it's like, it's very small. And in the female founders world, is really small. In the money going to female founders, is really small. Solo female founders even worse. So it's tiny. And the reality is like, there's a lot of biases. So when I was looking for examples on like, how should I manage my life, I was married, and I did plan to have a child at that time when I was married, and I didn't really know how to manage that, even with my investors, etc. Now I'm not married anymore, so I have another bias, is that I'm divorced. And I was like, another example, I was in a meeting with a guy, and for an investment, and he's like, oh, you divorced, so now you have money, so you don't need to fundraise. I'm like, hold on a second. So you have two assumptions. One is that my ex-husband had more money than me, and second is that there was a money exchange through the divorce, and both are wrong, so fuck off. And again, like, you know, if I was a man who was divorced, they would have never said that. So, you know, there's all these biases and all these things. So I think like diversity is really bad in our world. But the good thing is that it is changing, and women are like quite social, and we do help each other, and it is incredible. Like, I've been helped so much, and I've been very lucky. I'm also like, there are some advantages today being a woman. I am on certain panels. Is it because I'm a woman? Yeah, probably. Good for me. And I think like it's time also to benefit from that. And if you are like, you know, invited to certain things, and you should definitely benefit from it, and it's great. But we should also like, I read that book, is amazing. Like, why don't talk anymore to white people about race? It's not the exact title. Yeah. And it's a Black woman writing the book. And the incredible thing is that when you have lived discrimination, you can relate to people who have been discriminated, including Black people. So obviously, like, I'm a white woman, so I have less discrimination than a Black woman. But it's really interesting. Like, it is our role to also, because we have lived discrimination as women, it is our role to also help people who live in the worst discriminations. And it makes us very strong, actually, which is amazing, because like having a community of discriminated people makes us strong. And it's a great time to for that. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was all well. So what would your advice be for women or people who are underrepresented? So anyone who's not a white man, basically wanting to go into AI or finance.
Like, first of all, it's a great time, and second, like, it is, we do have to work double because there is biases and people think we're less smart, and if you accumulate like differences, it's harder. The nice thing is that when life is hard, it makes it tougher. And I think, like, as much as you can find purpose by doing what you love, you know, when I was younger, I was like, well, how do I find purpose? And we're like, well, do what you love. Like, if you like cooking, become a chef. The great thing is, like, you can actually also find purpose by your biggest insecurities, which is what I did. So I, like, my biggest insecurity is, like, literally, I did not think it was cool to be a woman. And now my whole job and my whole life is making sure I think it's cool to be a woman, and like making life great for me, but also for all the other women. And it's amazing. Like, it makes me so happy when I receive messages of like women saying like, oh, it helped me so much, etc. So anyone who has like more differences, etc., they actually really can use that as their advantage, because they're not the only ones. And as much as it's a small thing, like, and so first of all, like, dig deep inside, like, what are your insecurities, and second, use that, and third, like, create your network. Like, network is so powerful, and what you're doing Issy now here, and Hannah, like, thanks for supporting that, and Alex, is like, it's amazing. Like, these networks and these places where you talk about your issues and your insecurities and you're vulnerable is where you create your personal wealth in terms of network, and works.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I mean, I was going to ask you, do you think female founders have to work harder to be respected than men? But you preempted my question, so here we are. So my next question, I want to ask you a little bit about how we make this more mainstream, like having this conversation about menstruation and its relationship to sport and women in sport. So I went to all girls school, and this kind of thing was never mentioned in relation to sport. So how do you think we should approach this relationship between sport and menstruation? Is it something we should teach with puberty, or like what kind of age should we talk about it to young women?
Yeah, I think, like, first of all, menstruation, 100% sure we should be talked about, because, like, even like I mean, my family is, like, I think, quite like really open to speak about things. With 3 girls in the house, my dad actually always had Tampax in his car, because like we were like 4 women menstruating all the time, basically. But still having said that, my like sex education, or like in my education on like what is my body, has been very, very basic, actually. Like, even with a mom that is so open, and I spoke to her about it now, and she was like, well, I didn't realize that you didn't know these things. I'm like, well, how could I know? Like, first, like, what is a clitoris? Like, I remember that, like, if I literally like look at education on like on the genital areas, like I don't think the clitoris was actually really mentioned around like what is pleasure, and like, you know, all these things. Like, and so boys, men and boys, they do not understand the female body because they have not received that education, and they have zero idea, right? But girls neither. So I think there's all these things because like there's this shame around like women having pleasure, women masturbating, and all these things, by the way, are all together. Like the female pleasure and the education around the menstruations and like the periods. You know, like if you ask today, like period sex, is that okay? Like most men would still say no. And whereas there's a lot of benefits for women, like like, you know, having orgasms, it does release a lot of the tensions and the pressures that you may have in those areas, in the muscles. So I think, like, I do not have the answer. I don't have daughters, or I don't talk to like little girls on a very constant basis. So I'm not the right person to reply like, yeah, what is in that equation and what is in that messaging, like, you know, because sex and menstruations is like so closely tied. Even like, you know, the first time I used a Tampax was very late, because I was taught to like use pads because I was young, basically. So, you know, like we had no idea, basically. So I think we should definitely, but I'm definitely not the right person right now, at least.
Fair enough. It's interesting to get your thoughts on it, though. Thank you very much. So I've got a couple more questions, and then we've got a couple of questions coming in, so we're going to ask you about those. So I wanted to ask you, what's your favorite sport? Because you do so many.
Such a hard question because it's changing too often. But like right now, I'm actually really into surfing, and
Cool.
surfing has
In the
yeah.
UK?
No, I'm not in the UK.
Okay. Silly.
I'm in the Canaries Islands, and I've been hiding here for COVID for like 4 months now. Yeah, surfing has an incredible thing is that it has like very different hormones that release than most sports. Because if you go cycling 5 hours, you pretty much know what you're gonna get out of your session. Surfing has a lot of different hormones like endorphin, serotonin, adrenaline, but there's also like this uncertainty that you're not actually the master of what is happening in the water. Like you have this massive element that is the wave that you're catching or not, and so you have this constant like. It's actually very similar to being a founder. You paddle. Most of the time you're paddling, by the way. You paddle, and you have like this idea of this bliss wave that is going to happen, and then you paddle, and then you try to get it, and boom, you fail, and you paddle again, fail, and then eventually you got that like 1 second of bliss, and you go on it, and then boom, you have like a massive washout and a big slap on the face, which is very much what's happening as a founder. But it's so high on like on the rewards because you don't know if you're not gonna get that wave or not, and suddenly when you get it, it's very rewarding. So yeah, I think like surfing is has very different types of stuff.
Yeah, that was not the answer I was expecting. So what is the best bit about running your own company? Sounds really cool, but
I think it's so rewarding. I think first of all, it's hard. It's hardcore. It is way less sexy, by the way, than it sounds. Like most of my job is like doing admin and like doing crisis management and getting slapped, similar to surfing. But it is super rewarding. I think like having people, from like our members who send like private messages saying like this is amazing, like I love what you're doing, thank you for all the hard work. I'm like, oh my god, this is amazing. People who choose to work with us, like they choose the career, and like work is like a lot of time in your days. It's like basically like we spend most of our adult time working, which is crazy, and they choose to work in that is amazing. People who put their money, like our investors, and then like having coverage, and like it's incredible, and feeling that's what we do has an impact on women's life actually is insane. Like it's very, very rewarding.
yeah, that's pretty cool. And then my final question for you before we pull some up from the floor is what's one thing you would want to tell your younger self?
Create. So like I often discussion, I think is like creating is insane because like we're very consumption oriented as a generation in society. By that I mean not only like Netflix and apps, but reading books, etc. Like I actually don't watch TV, but I read a lot of books. But instead of consuming, is like creating, because everything you create, you're accumulating that as wealth. And what I mean by that specifically is, if you have no idea what you want to do in your life, it doesn't matter because it will change anyways, like hundreds of times. But if you create, you actually are accumulating weight. So if you have whatever the interest is in it, like you can actually, if you read a book, for instance, make a comment on it, and you can publish privately on Medium. But if you're interested in AI, or if you're interested in like rugby, or if you're interested in like cooking, whatever it is, like comment on articles, make that, publish it. And then later on, like when you're looking for a job, or if you want to create your own company, you have like 15, 20 articles that are created. And it's super valuable. So creating whatever the shape of it is, it's writing article, like drawing, whatever, it's super valuable. So yeah, creating a lot.
Cool. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you. I think we've got some questions coming in.